Welcome to Magical Mystery Talk number 10. It's been a year since the last one, which is about all we can manage these days. We're all busy and there's so much stuff going on, and there's other factors as well. But this is Mark Devlin, and I'm joined as ever by Matt Sergiu of the Occult Beatles site. Welcome back, Matt.
Hi, hi, hi.
And also Desiree Hall of the Number Nines blog. Desiree, welcome.
Hello, hello.
Okay, so loads to talk about, would be, as it's been a year.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to try and group things together. So we talk about John-related stuff first off, and then get into Paul, and then see where it takes us from there. So the first item we got on the agenda this time around concerns the re-release of John's 1973 album Mind Games in a box set. And there's all kinds of other intriguing stuff related to this as well. So who wants to take it from here?
Shall I go for it? Okay. Because there's a lot. So this box set came out in July of 2024. And yeah, it's just the usual kind of thing you get with a box set. You get them a lot these days, don't you? Albums from decades gone by re-released on box sets. So you get outtakes in them. You get the remastered version of the original album. You get extra bonus tracks that weren't released on the original album, maybe tracks that were recorded but put aside and kind of discarded. And that's basically what's happened with this Mind Games album. There's a box set of it, and along with the box set came some digital bonus tracks as well, which are available online or via phone app, including, most interestingly for the likes of us, I think, so-called meditation mixes of tracks from the album. These are meditation remixes of certain tracks from the Mind Games album. And having listened to them myself, they're available actually on Spotify and YouTube, and they've just been released on vinyl as well. You can get them on vinyl album, I think. Basically, having listened to them myself, they're ambient mixes. So they fall on, I would say they fall under the ambient music genre, or also what's also known as drone. And yeah, having listened to them, these meditation mixes, they are, as the title suggests, very dreamy sounding, and they're designed to make you go off, as it were, into another place. Now, where it gets interesting for the likes of this podcast and for us is these meditation mixes are designed to be heard alongside what's called the Luminate app. So that's Lumenate. Now, the Luminate app, to quote from the John Lennon official website, is, and I quote, a consciousness expanding psychedelic meditation phone app. The Luminate app uses the flashlight on the back of one's smartphone strobed at research-driven frequencies onto a person's closed eyes to neurologically guide them into a state of consciousness between that of deep meditation and psychedelics. Each of the 9 meditation mixes has been paired with a unique, deeply immersive light sequence using carefully selected flicker frequencies to accompany the mind and mood altering sound. These singular mind altering sequences elevate the musical journey. Now, Sean Lennon, John and Yoko's son, has been overseeing the whole Mind Games project, from what I understand. And he's quoted as saying on the John Lennon official website that with regards to Luminate, he said, "I'm very happy to be working with Luminate on this. I've been using the Luminate app for my own personal meditations since it launched, and I've had many profound experiences. My father was famously into meditation, and I remember trying his flicker machine that he kept in the bedroom, which is what first introduced me to the idea of stroboscopic brainwave induction." And again, according to the Lennon official website, this flicker machine, according to the John Lennon official website that John used to use, they were like goggles. So he'd put these goggles on his eyes in his bedroom, and they allowed him, according to the John Lennon website, to effortlessly tap into deeply meditative states. Mm-hmm. So before I go on, I'm just wondering, at this point, are we getting into the realms of mind control again? Are we going down the same old road that we
sounds like some Dr. Asher technology, doesn't it? Dr. Richard Asher stuff.
Yeah, and this is the kind of stuff. I don't know how many podcasts we've done now where we've gone down the road of John Lennon and mind control, but this kind of are we going down that same road here again?
Well, it's called Mind Games
because, well, yeah. Now, apparently this flicker machine, it's based according to the John Lennon official website, this flicker machine, these goggles that John Lennon had, they're quote unquote an early version of the Dream Machine. People listening to this might be aware of what the Dream Machine is or was. It was first built, I think, in the late 1950s, and it was a co-creation of between artist and poet Brian Gyson and also beat poet William Burroughs. And basically, I mean, there have been many incarnations of this Dream Machine, but basically, just to give you one version of it, and you can find this online. There's video of it, there's photographs of it, and basically what it is, it's like a cylinder. And it's on a turntable and it spins around and it's got like holes in it. And inside this cylinder, you've got a light bulb. So basically when this machine, this cylinder is spinning around and around on this turntable and you've got the light bulb inside it, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to stare at it with your eyes closed. And it takes you off, and apparently it gives you like hallucinations. It gives you an altered state of consciousness without the need for taking psychedelic drugs. Basically, it makes you hallucinate as well. So, yeah, with regards to Luminate, the company, it's actually a company. It's the name of a company that created this phone app. That creates, in the words of the Lennon official website, mind-altering sequences. Surprise, surprise, I wanted to know a little bit more about them. So I've looked on their website and they claim, and I quote, that they are on a mission to inspire people to live more fulfilling lives through accessible consciousness-altering experience, from interviewing people at Burning Man to months of EEG brain scans, developing and optimizing our method of inducing altered states only using light and sound. Now, what I find personally quite intriguing when I looked at Luminate's website is that Luminate gets backing from, I think it's a company, they're called Beckley Waves, which was co-founded by a woman who's been on my radar on and off for a number of years now, a lady by the name of Amanda Fielding, and she runs the Beckley Foundation, which is a non-governmental organisation. Now, anyone who's listening to this who's familiar with my work will know that I also not only look into the Beatles, but I also look into the 1960s counterculture of the UK to check out for clues that it was social engineered. And one of those characters that's popped in and out of my research has been Amanda Fielding, because she was one of the movers and shakers of the 60s counterculture scene. She's British born. She's a countess. Surprise, surprise. Apparently,
is her dad a plumber?
No, certainly not a plumber. No, definitely not. Now, what a surprise, eh? Apparently, sometime in the 1970s, well, from about the 1970s, 80s onwards, basically what she's been doing, been lobbying within British Parliament and elsewhere within the so-called British halls of power, as it were, to have psychedelic drugs legalised so that they can be used, well, according to her anyway, to aid mental health. And interestingly, her Beckley Foundation website states, and I quote, that she has been called the hidden hand behind the renaissance of psychedelic science. Very interesting that she should have that on her website. And I've noticed it myself. I don't know if you guys have, but over the last 10 years or so, maybe a little bit longer, I don't know, there has been a move by the mainstream to kind of legalise psychedelic drugs. And the argument that the mainstream is putting forward is that we need to legalise psychedelic drugs so that we can experiment with them for the good of, quote unquote, mental health, for the well-being, for mental well-being, for curing mental illness. I've certainly noticed some mainstream magazine articles about this, newspaper articles. And wasn't there a film that came out a few years ago promoting LSD? And I think Sting was in it. I can't remember the name of it.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. So there does seem to be this kind of renaissance that's going on at the moment. They're trying
Sting
to
of the CIA band, The Police, that one.
Yeah, exactly.
We here in California, some psychedelic mushrooms have been legalized. We have, legal marijuana and we have legal mushrooms. So you can go to a dispensary and buy them.
Yeah. So that would fall into that psychedelic range. So psychedelic, LSD, psilocybin, mushrooms, whatever it is. Yeah, I feel like there is this push going on. Interestingly, one of the Beckley Foundation's mottos is changing minds, altering perceptions. There, which caught my attention. Another little motto. And apparently, from what I understand, the Beckley Foundation was formed in 1998. And to quote from the website, the research spearheaded and supported by the Beckley Foundation has not only reawakened worldwide interest in the medicinal, therapeutic and spiritual applications of psychedelics, but it has inspired and motivated advocates to challenge outdated and obstructive drug policies that are undermining potential advancements in public health and denying millions of people access to safe and effective treatments. Safe and effective, where I've heard that phrase before. There you are. You've got it right there on their website. This is what they're doing. They're pushing to legalize psychedelics for the good of mental health, so they say.
That's because they care about us, Matt. They just want to help us. That's all it is.
Oh, yeah, sure. And also, according to their website, more recently, it states, Fielding has also co-founded Beckley Psytech, a private company working to develop a pipeline of psychedelic compounds and licensed pharmaceutical medicines that can be used in the treatment of neurological and psychiatric disorders. And now Beckley Waves will carry on Fielding's legacy by supporting the emerging leaders and companies that are actively building a global infrastructure to enable safe, legal and responsible access to psychedelic medicines and psychedelic assisted therapies. And indeed, when you look at the Beckley Waves website, it states that it invests in, supports and mentors emerging leaders, entrepreneurs and partnerships working to create the operational infrastructure of a global psychedelic ecosystem. I've looked quite closely at Beckley Psytech's website in particular, and up to this point, as we're recording this now in December 24, they've been quite hard at work undertaking studies and trials with human guinea pigs, actually. And to use their words, they've been carrying out trials with people using synthetic compounds, is one of the words they use, and also a short-acting psychedelic compound. They've been experimenting with what's called BPL-003, which is a synthetic version of MEO-DMT, which, if I'm not wrong, and I know I'm going to pronounce this all wrong, 5-methoxy NN-dimethyltryptamine, and
DMT.
and DMT, yeah. And basically, this substance that they've been using has been taken from you can find it in plants, and it's also high. You can also find high concentrations of it in the species of toad known as Bufo alvarius. You can find it in its venom, apparently. And according to Beckley Psytech, when this BPL-003 was tested on humans, and I quote, the intensity of the psychedelic experience was shown to correlate with exposure to the compound, with scores of the mystical experience questionnaire and ego dissolution inventory increasing proportionately with the dosage of BPL-003. 60% of participants had a complete mystical experience. And they've got a little warning, okay? If you want to volunteer, they're currently advertising, if I'm not mistaken, for human volunteers, okay? And they've got a little proviso, though, okay? If you do want to become a psychedelic volunteer, okay, guinea pig, they do have a little warning for you. That's on their website. And I quote, "It isn't possible to predict how psychedelics will affect an individual person. Clinical trials are an experiment. They are being done because we do not yet know if psychedelic therapy is a safe and effective form of treatment. Therefore, one's participation in a trial comes with some risks. Your condition could improve, stay the same, or it could worsen. Psychedelic therapy is not a reset for your brain, and it is not a quick fix. Regardless of what happens, it's important to have the right support around you if this happens. But there are limits to the extent the study team can support you, particularly out of normal office hours." So
But it might as
if you
well
have
be
a
an ad for
meltdown,
crack cocaine or heroin in what they're saying about it.
so
There are no guarantees.
and what gets me about that is if you have a meltdown or a flashback or a panic attack after 5:30 on a Friday night, don't bother calling them because they're not going to be there. You know, it's like out of normal office hours. You know, it's just crazy. Another thing about Amanda Fielding, and this brings us back to Lennon. As I said before, she was a member of a mover and shaker in the 60s counterculture scene. And yeah, right. And you're correct, Mark. Her parents were not plumbers. Her parents
Were they in the
her
military?
father was Well, her father was an earl.
Wild guess.
Yeah, her father was an earl, and
aristocracy. Okay.
yeah, and her mother was a marquess. So yeah, no plumbers there. And apparently, when she was a child, she can remember Aldous Huxley popping by to visit her parents. You know.
We used to pop by here. That's nothing.
Right. Yeah, he just came round earlier to give me my Christmas card. Yeah.
Straight after the Rothschilds.
I just wonder what was in the tea.
DMT. Apparently.
And the Lennon link, apart from the fact that Luminate this company are connected to all these people, this Amanda Fielding and the Beckley Foundation and so on. In the late 60s or early 70s, sometime around then, Amanda Fielding actually drilled a hole in her skull with a dentist's drill in a practice known as tree panning. Anyone who's
done that too.
anyone who knows about tree panning, apparently advocates of tree panning believe it increases the blood flow to the brain if you do that, and as a result it gives one a higher state of consciousness, and some people think it gives you a third eye. And apparently in the late 70s and early 80s she actually campaigned for trepanation to be offered free on England's National Health Service. I kid you not.
Wow.
I don't know much about consciousness studies, but I didn't think you were supposed to drill yourself a third eye.
She apparently made a film about this. I've tried to find it on YouTube, but she has made a film about this, drilling a hole in her head. Yeah, the reason I'm mentioning that in particular is that Paul McCartney, some years back, I do remember him saying in an interview that John Lennon wanted to do this.
Yeah, I recall that as well.
Yeah, apparently Paul McCartney recalls that one day he was sitting with John Lennon sometime in the late 60s, and John said to him, "Hey, why don't we try tree panning?" And Paul said, no thanks. So there go. These are the people that are behind, they support and fund the Luminate people that have made this Luminate app, which is
what could possibly go wrong.
What could possibly go wrong? We haven't even got into the inspiration of the song Mind Games yet, and that's a mind blower.
Yeah.
If you want me to do that as well, because that's quite mind blowing.
All right. Very quickly then.
All right, very quickly then. Now, according to John Lennon, the song Mind Games, the actual song, not the album, the actual song Mind Games, he said in one or two interviews in the past, he said that it was based on a book that he'd read. But he also said that the lyrics of the song are not about the book, but he said that the song was about the book. He remembered the way I think what he means is he read the book and it gave him the inspiration to write the actual tune, the song. Now, the book that he says led him to release this song, to write this song, the full title of this book, which I think was released originally in 1972, is Mind Games, The Guide to Inner Space, and it's credited to Jean Houston and her husband, Robert Masters. And in very simple terms, this book that John read, basically a guide on, here we go again, how to alter one's state of consciousness without the aid of drugs. To quote Houston in an interview, she said, "It's a book people can use to create altered states and explore their inner realms without drugs. Things like time distortion and visual landscapes." Now, I've looked at this book and I've kind of skimmed through it, read parts of it and so on. It's like an instruction book on how to achieve altered states of consciousness. And what it says you need to do is you need to find a group of people to play mind games, right? And for these mind games to take place, you need a group. And within that group, you need one or two people who can be your guide. And these guides have to be psychologists. Quoting from the book, these mind games help the players to open inner doors, gateways to the other places within, and after that, accompanies the player with the player when the voyage is over. Very quickly, one of the games on there is you're put into a trance. The guide places you into a trance and makes you go back to being an infant again, not only to relive you as a child, but not in a memory kind of way, but to actually be a child, to think like a child, to see the world around you like a child, to feel like emotionally like a child, and then slowly the mind game, the guide brings you back again to adulthood. Another game which is a bit more disturbing, does to me kind of go into the MK Ultra territory. It's a role-playing game. What they want you to do, what they instruct you to do in this book, is basically, if you're in a group, you have to pair off. So you pair off with whoever and you sit down and you look at the person that's sitting opposite you and you stare at them and they stare back at you, and you have to keep on staring at each other, like really focus on each other. So to quote from the book, and tell me if this isn't MK, as you keep looking at the face in front of you, you will notice changes in that face. You do know now that each person has many possibilities, many appearances, identities which may be waiting to emerge, and the possibility too of being a screen upon which appearances, possibilities and identities may be projected by someone else. Go deeper and feel yourself going deeper and listening and beginning to consider what it would be like to be that person you are confronting. Go deeper and wonder what it would be like to be in that body that sits there facing you, and feeling yourself slipping into it as identities transfer themselves between bodies, going deeper and into that body so that it is you. And now feeling that you really are being shaped in your thoughts and your feelings by your body, so that your new body increasingly gives you the identity of that person who a while back was other. Look over there at that person opposite you who was yourself. And the book then goes on to say, to explain other things that you have to do within this particular quote unquote mind game.
I think I'll stick to Twister.
Oh God, I can't. No, my back couldn't handle Twister. And there's also another one, just to mention one more of these games. Maybe this book should be called Mind Control Games. But anyway, there's another one where the guide teaches you to self-induce yourself into a trance. So you can actually alter your state of consciousness, place yourself in a trance by yourself. And they give you a word, okay? A word, they call it a word image, so that you can self-induce yourself, okay? And the word they give in the book is butterfly.
As in monarch.
I'll just leave it at that.
That almost sounds familiar. I'm trying to find it, but I couldn't bring it up. But I seem to recall John Lennon actually saying that he did something like that, where you sit in front of the other person and stare at them. With Paul McCartney, back in the day when they were starting their psychedelic experiences together. And I was trying to pull it up and find it, and I couldn't. But I seem to recall that he was saying he was staring at Paul McCartney, and his face started changing, and all of these things that sounded really familiar. So I wonder if that's part of it.
That does ring a bell. That does.
Yeah.
Now you mention it, that does ring a bell. But when you started mentioning that, I was thinking of something else, and I'm sure you might remember this too, guys. Desiree, I don't know, that when he was a child, John Lennon says he remembers as a child in Liverpool, he would look into the mirror and he would rub his eyes. Yeah, he would rub his eyes really hard and try and get himself into an alpha state. I remember him saying that. I can't remember where that quote is. I don't remember hearing him say that, but I remember reading it in an interview or something like that. Yeah.
I want to say a Playboy interview for some reason popped into my head when you were talking about that, but I could be wrong on that. But yeah, interesting.
But don't worry, guys. The Beatles were just 4 regular working class lads from Liverpool who just happened to become famous, punted around a few demo tapes. That's all there is to it. There's nothing more to know. There's nothing nefarious or mysterious here.
No, wrote 900 and something songs in 7 years. And
of course, we've all done it.
And a lot of them came in a dream, like Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine.
It's normal,
Yesterday,
man. It's
normal. And actually, while we're on this, as we're getting darker, actually getting into the realms of MK, maybe I think it's interesting to note some of the people who actually helped to put this book together, because it was authored by Jean Houston and her husband, but there were other people involved in putting this book together, people who actually, to quote from the book, people who actually helped to devise and test and experiment these mind games that were then given the okay to be put in this book. Some names are mentioned of some very nefarious characters. One of those is Bernard Aronson. He was a psychologist, no surprises there. And in 1977, it was revealed that he'd been involved in CIA experiments with LSD on inmates at a reformatory. And this was going on. These experiments were going on with Aronson in the 1960s at the New Jersey Bureau of Research in Neurology and Psychiatry. And he was also pals with, here we go again, Aldous Huxley. And he's actually responsible for first turning on Aldous Huxley to mescaline. And it was as a result of Huxley taking mescaline that he wrote the book. Writing about that experience, he went on to write the book Doors of Perception. Doors of Perception is actually based on his experiences of mescaline after Humphrey Osmond introduced him to that drug. And of course, as we know, Doors of Perception became this kind of 60s counterculture Bible, and is said to have inspired the Doors to name themselves the Doors. Here we go again. Osmond was actually the director of that New Jersey Bureau of Research in Neurology and Psychiatry at the time that the CIA experiments with LSD were going on. And he was also one of the people that contributed to that Mind Games book. So, and Osmond is reported to have also been involved not only with the CIA, but also MI6 as well. Someone else who contributed to the book it was Dr. John C. Lilly, an American physician who rubbed shoulders with the likes of Timothy Leary, also R.D. Laing, who was known as the British counterculture's in-house psychiatrist. Tavistock Clinic connected, wrote some documents and reports for the Tavistock Clinic, if I'm not mistaken. And he also rubbed shoulders with, here we go again, Aldous Huxley. Dr. John Lilly was involved in psychedelic research in the 50s. So this was back in the day before LSD was well known, before it became a mainstream drug. Lilly was experimenting with it. So this is back in the days when it was when LSD was being used within the confines of the military intelligence complex, as it were. And he's also well known for his experiments with isolation tanks filled with water, where people could float for long periods in sensory isolation. There is this belief that if you're put in one of these isolation tanks, you can actually alter your state of consciousness. Here we go again.
This is straight out of the TV series Stranger Things. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't. I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I've mentioned Stranger Things several times. So you've got this character,
I've heard,
11, portrayed by Millie Bobby Brown, and she's in a sort of MK Ultra style mind control facility, and they put her in these isolation tanks where she goes into these altered states, as you say, and she can do things like remote viewing and telekinesis and such, and it's portrayed right there. And they tell you in the narrative of that show, this is MK Ultra, came out of the CIA, and it was very real. And I'm sure people watching the show just think, oh, this is wild fiction, but no, they're actually telling you about all this stuff that really did go on.
Yeah, and the show it's supposed to be taking place like in the early 80s, 1980s.
Exactly.
So it's 83. Almost like a recollection of things that possibly really could have happened.
And did.
Yeah.
We now know.
There was a movie that came out in the 50s, and I think it starred Dirk Bogarde, the British heartthrob actor of the 50s and 60s. I think it came out in the 50s, and it was based in Oxford, Mark. It was based in Oxford University, and he was a guy who was experimenting with an isolation tank. And he went into it, and his personality changed. They didn't state in the film that it was based on real life. But
Matt, you can't be saying that sort of thing goes on at Oxford University. Come on now, that's too much of a stretch. I can't accept that.
Well, if it wasn't going on there, it wasn't going on at Stanford either, right? Yeah,
sure. Or Cambridge, where Chris from Sheep Farm is. And also, Desiree, there's a character in there played by Matthew Modine, Dr. Martin Brenner. And to my thinking, he's very clearly modelled on Dr. Ewan Cameron, who was a notorious MKUltra doctor working at McGill University in Montreal. It's pretty clear that he's portraying a Cameron-type character there. Anyway, perhaps we should mention that in the accompanying book to this Mind Games reissue, there's a reference to Aleister Crowley and magic. Go figure. So not the first nor the last time that Crowley has cropped up in Beatles research, right?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely. Just to underline Dr. John C. Lilly, it turns out that he was actually using, his quote was, with regards to altered state of consciousness, it was a doorway into the universe. It allows one to escape one's body. One soul can leave, and one can clean one's karma from one soul and become pure spirit in communication with God. That's what he claims he was undertaking these experiments with the isolation tanks for. It was a psychedelic experience. But if you flip over the coin, it has been reported that for a time, at least, Lilly was actually working with the military-industrial complex on experiments during the so-called Cold War to use these isolation tanks to, quote unquote, modify and control behavior of so-called enemy agents. I found a report in 1956, a news report, in which a Dr. Robert H. Felix, who was director of the National Institute for Mental Health, where Lilly worked at the time, in this news report, it says that he informed a committee of senators that Lilly's work with isolation tanks, and I quote, explain how brainwashing works. A long period of imprisonment in a dark, nearly silent cell is effective. With normal sensation cut off, the prisoner's thinking is disorganized. He grows desperately hungry for any kind of information, however unreliable, from the outside world. And just to really underline this, Jean Houston, the author, the co-author of this Mind Games book, has worked for the UN. And she's also worked with President Bill Clinton and Hillary as well. So there you have it. Yeah, Mind Games, the lyrics, yeah, Crowley. This is I wasn't aware of this. I mean, basically, when you get the Mind Games box set, if you buy the Mind Games box set, you get a free book with it, a hardback book. And basically, this hardback book gives you the background of the making of the album, interviews with the musicians, and so on and so on. And also what was going on in John and Yoko's life at the time. Yeah, I'll just quickly reel off one verse of Mind Games, the song, the actual song, which was released as a single from the album. We're playing those mind games together, pushing the barriers, planting seeds, playing the mind gorilla, chanting the mantra, peace on earth. We all been playing those mind games forever, some kind of druid dudes lifting the veil, doing the mind gorilla. Some call it magic, the search for the grail. Now, in the Mind Games book, there's actually a typewritten lyric sheet. And according to the caption that's next to it, this piece of paper, this typewritten lyric sheet to Mind Games, was being used in the studio at the time by John. So I'm assuming it was one of those lyric sheets that they had standing up on a music stand or something so that the musicians could look at it, like a guide vocal kind of thing. And it's typewritten, and officially the word magic in the lyrics, if you look online or wherever you want to look, officially it's spelled M-A-G-I-C. But if you look on that typewritten piece of paper of John's, somebody, I would assume it's John, has scribbled in a K on the end of magic, which is rather interesting.
Indicating knowledge of what Crowley was into. So it's Crowleyan magic as opposed to David Blaine, Paul Daniels type magic.
That's right. This magic with the K is the spelling that Crowley championed, isn't it?
I mentioned David Blaine just so Desiree would know what I'm talking about there, because Paul Daniels doesn't cut it with American audiences.
Not a lot.
I got it. Thanks.
To quote Crowley from one of his written works, with regards to the word magic with a K, I found myself at a loss for a name to designate my work. I chose, therefore, the name magic, as essentially the most sublime and actually the most discredited of all the available terms. I must make magic the essential factor in the life of all. I must then explain and justify my position by formulating a definition of magic and setting forth its main principles in such a way that all may understand instantly that their souls, their lives, in every relation with every other human being in every circumstance depend upon magic with a K, and the right comprehension and right application thereof. Definition: magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. There's more Crowleyan references on the Mind Games album.
Okay, we should probably wrap up the Mind Games stuff there, because we've got loads more to get through. What amazes me when we do these shows actually is just how the Beatles mythos is being systematically kept alive after all these decades, because it seems like every month there's a new book or a documentary or an exhibition or something just to keep this group's name out there. And my daughter, who's just about to turn 14, has recently discovered the Beatles, and she knows more about them than me now because she's done like 10 crash courses in this group's history. And we're going up to Liverpool in a couple of weeks, actually, to go around some Beatles sites. We're going to the Kasbar Club, and we're going to Paul and John's childhood homes and all these sorts of places. But it seems to be the strategy to make the Beatles appealing to new generations that weren't around at the time that they were. So there's got to be a reason why this group, over and above all others, has been selected for that. It certainly keeps this podcast going anyway.
Right.
So in among the list of new books and films and such, we've got these new memoirs by Elliot Mintz. We All Shine On, John, Yoko and Me. And given that this guy lived in Laurel Canyon, interesting location, which is right where Desiree is in California there, or close to, do you maybe want to take up this one, Desiree, and tell us about this memoir by Elliot Mintz and also who he was?
Right. I am not so debriefed on Elliot Mintz. I know him from that he was, the close with John and Yoko, particularly at the time of John Lennon's death. But I haven't read this new memoir, and I know that Laurel Canyon is especially recently more of a hot topic. I heard that one of the Rothschilds just passed away in Laurel Canyon from a house fire. But other than that, I am not. This is, I think, more one for Matt for sure.
I mean, Elliot Mintz, since John Lennon died, has become Yoko's official spokesperson. I think that's
exactly.
Yeah,
he does a lot of speaking for Yoko.
I don't know about you, Desiree, but if you've ever heard him talk, he's got this kind of sinister voice. He sounds almost hypnotic, a little bit creepy, kind of softly spoken, almost hypnotic, talks very slowly.
Does he mince, or is that just his name?
Makes me feel... I think he probably does. But I find him a little bit creepy. I do find him a little bit creepy. And I would not only say that he's Yoko's official spokesperson. For me, having listened to him over the years when he talks on behalf of Yoko, I would say he's her mouthpiece. And what I mean by that is he is pushing her official narrative, because I think Yoko has in the past and continues to give the world her version of the John and Yoko story, which makes her look really good, and to John's expense maybe in some instances. So basically she's using Elliot as this mouthpiece. Basically he's her media lackey. Right. I mean, that's the impression I get of him. He's there to push the Yoko narrative.
Right. I'm sure he gets paid handsomely.
Yeah.
By Yoko, for sure.
He first met Yoko and John in the early 70s. He met Yoko first. Basically, he used to be a radio DJ in the 60s, and then he later became a media consultant for the likes of Bob Dylan, Diana Ross, and also Paris Hilton, which is weird.
That well-known DJ.
What? Paris Hilton? Yeah, that well-known DJ who uses US. Yeah, very odd person. You get Lennon, Dylan, then Paris Hilton. Bit weird. Where did she come from?
I think MK Ultra is the denominator there.
Possibly. I never thought of that. So he was a radio DJ, and he met Yoko through being a radio DJ. He interviewed her in the early 70s, 1971, 72, sometime around then. And he, as a result of that, he began to become friends with her. And through her, he then met John, and eventually he became their friends. But he wasn't only their friend during the 70s. He hung around with John. He was basically kind of like their fixer. He would like do favors for them. He would be a confidant. He would tend to their whims and fancies. He would go on holiday with them. He would go on vacation with them and do little errands for them while he was on vacation with them. So he was kind of a friend come gopher kind of thing, or fixer, if you like. Now, if you remember, we actually talked about Elliot in the very first episode of Magical Mystery Talk. And we talked about him living in Laurel Canyon. And there's if I'm not wrong, I remember at the time that we spoke about Elliot in that first episode, we mentioned that his radio career was given a really big boost in the 60s when he was a student, a media student in college, because he just so happened to be at college when the JFK shooting occurred. And it just so happened that one of the people in his college at the time was a Marine or someone who used to serve in the Marines with Lee Harvey Oswald. It just so happens that, wow, what a coincidence that Elliot Mintz should be in college with this guy at that particular moment in time, and this helped to catapult Elliot Mintz's career, if you like. He does mention this in the book. Basically, the book is Mintz's memoirs in relation to his years with John and Yoko throughout the 70s up until 1980 or thereabouts. And yeah, this is what he says in the book about that incident with JFK. He says, so he's been in college, okay, for 3 months, a media student in Hollywood, okay. To quote from his book, he says, I stumbled into the biggest break of my career, which, as it happened, occurred on one of the worst days in American history. We were attending classes on November 22nd, 1963, when the announcement came over the school speakers that President John F. Kennedy had been shot. A small group of us broadcasting kids headed to our department's bungalow and huddled around a TV to watch reports of the assassination. A few hours into the newscast, the first photos of Lee Harvey Oswald started flashing on the screen. That's Lee, I heard one of my classmates exclaim. I was in the Marines with that guy. I don't know how, during that horrible, tragic day, I had the presence of mind to recognise the massive opportunity that had just fallen into my lap, but I took my classmate into another room, sat down with him, and turned on my tape recorder. It wasn't the most in-depth interview of my career. I was still very much the radio novice, but it was definitely the most auspiciously timed, I bet. So to quickly explain what happened next, this young, wet behind the ears Mintz had taped the interview. He sent it to LA's biggest local radio news station in the area, and by the end of the day, it was being aired across the whole of the US on the super mainstream CBS Evening News. Then he left college after a couple of years and began a career in radio.
Serendipity is a wonderful thing.
It is, isn't it? I mean, what are the chances? So yeah, I've picked out some. I've read the book. I have read the book, and I've picked out some little bits that I think would be of interest to us. Some interesting observations, and I've got one here where he claims that John was, quote unquote, suspicious of prescription medicine. To quote Mintz from the book, John was one of the original anti-vaxxers. After his son Sean's birth in 1975, John would try everything he could to keep his son away from the needle. Interesting. Also, with relation to JFK, actually going back to JFK again, Mintz writes in his book, John had a thing about JFK. And I quote, he found conspiracy theories fascinating. John tried to convince me that he had single-handedly solved the mystery of the JFK shooting. After studying the evidence, he said it was clear to him that the driver of the presidential limousine had done it, turning around from the front seat in the car and shooting Kennedy in the head with a pistol.
Wow.
Also quite interesting in the book is that he does go a little bit into the occult world that Yoko is known to dabble in, to put it mildly. He mentions an incident that occurred at the Dakota apartment building in New York where John and Yoko lived. He was there one day, and this was around 1979, 1980. And he the way he explains it was he was sitting there one day, and John and Yoko said to him that the old lady who lived down the hallway, there were rumours that she wanted to sell her apartment, and John and Yoko wanted to buy it. If it was true, if this rumor was true, they were very interested in buying it so that they could extend their apartment and make it bigger. So what Yoko did, and this is according to Elliot, she somehow, he doesn't explain how she did this, but she somehow managed to get a spare key. And one day she, John and Elliot Mintz let themselves in to this room to have a look around. And apparently the reason Yoko wanted to have a look around was to get a vibe of the place. She wanted to walk around and get a vibe of the place. And Elliot in the book recalls saying to Yoko, well, look, if you want to buy the place, why don't you just make an offer? And Yoko replied, yeah, but before I make an offer, I have to find the best way to make it. And with this, Elliot claims Yoko reached into her bag and took out a candle, some crystals, and a deck of tarot cards and placed them on a nearby coffee table. And Mintz quotes her as saying, "We must find a way of getting her to want to sell us the apartment. Otherwise, she might sell it to someone else who makes a better offer." So she lit the candle, rubbed the crystals between her fingers for a few minutes, and then she spent some time turning over tarot cards and studying them. Then she closed her eyes for a while, and then she blew out the candle. And with this, she put everything back into her bag, all her occult paraphernalia, and they left the apartment. 2 weeks later, Elliot in the book claims that he got a phone call from John saying, "She did it. We've got the apartment." In the book, Elliot also mentions that from time to time, Yoko would use numerology to aid her, and she would use it for John as well. He refers to her, and I'm paraphrasing him here from the book, he refers to her team of numerologists and tarot card readers. And he also, in the book, echoes something that Yoko has actually said herself in one or two interviews. I recall there's one interview where she talked about this specifically, and I've featured it on my website, The Occult Beatles. He mentions that she takes great value in ancient Egyptian artifacts, but not necessarily for their financial value, but for their magical qualities. He claimed in the book, actually there's a photograph of this. I've seen a photograph of her in the Dakota with this in the background. He claims that in the Dakota, in her apartment, she's got a 3,000-year-old sarcophagus from Egypt. In other words, a mummy in a plexiglass case. And Elliot in the book recalls one day chatting about it with her, and he said to her, "Why don't you have it x-rayed to see what's inside it? There might be like something of really great financial value in it, like jewels, precious jewels or something of that kind." And she said, no, I don't want this I don't want this sarcophagus for its financial value. I want it for its magical qualities. And I'm paraphrasing here. I recall her in an interview in 1980, just shortly before John Lennon was shot, where actually I've got the quote here in front of me on a piece of paper. Let me just get it for you. Yeah, she says, "To make money, you have to spend money. But if you are going to make money, you have to make it with love. I love Egyptian art. I make sure I get all the Egyptian things, not for their value, but for their magic power. Each piece has a magic power." So that's her basically. So basically, Elliot Mintz is kind of confirming what she's already said herself in that regard. And in past editions, I think in at least one edition of Magical Mystery Talk, we've actually talked about that period in John's life where Yoko Ono threw him out and they were separated for 18 months or so, the so-called lost weekend, when strangely Yoko threw him out and gave him a girlfriend to to go off with, which was rather odd. May Pang, we talked about May Pang in a previous episode, where she claims that she was getting on with John, they were in love, and then one day out of nowhere he just decided he wanted to go back to Yoko Ono. And she claims the reason that happened is because one day he got a phone call from Yoko asking him to come to the Dakota to see a hypnotist who was going to cure him of his smoking habit. So off he went, and before he went, May claims that she tried to warn him against doing this because she had a nasty feeling about it. But he said, no, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And off he went. And when he returned, she claims that he was a different person. He was almost like a zombie, that something happened when he went off to the Dakota to see this quote unquote hypnotist.
MK Ultra top up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in the Mind Game, in this new book by Elliot Mintz, he claims that he was the one that actually found the hypnotist for John. He claims in the book that it wasn't Yoko's idea, it was his idea, that he was the one that located the hypnotist and contacted John about seeing this hypnotist, about quote unquote getting rid of his smoking habit. What Elliot claims in his book is that no, it wasn't Yoko, it was him. And this hypnotist that he'd found is a hypnotist that John was interested in actually seeing. He'd heard Elliot had actually interviewed this hypnotist on his radio show some time before, and John Lennon remembered this, and he said to Elliot, "Hey, if you ever get in contact with that hypnotist again, let me know, because I'd like him to try and help me quit smoking." So that's what Elliot claims, is that he finally came into contact with this hypnotist again and called John and said, "Hey, why don't you come over to the Dakota and maybe this guy can help you out." To quote from Mintz's book, so he goes to see this hypnotist, and to quote Mintz, John didn't quit smoking, not for a minute, as a result of the hypnotist. So, and he goes on, so it's hard to imagine that the hypnotist, having not helped John quit smoking, it's hard to imagine the hypnotist had succeeded in brainwashing him into anything else, like, say, leaving a lover, May Pang. But get this, Elliot goes on, but the very next day, John did break it off with May and returned to the Dakota, resuming his marriage with Yoko. So was it because of the hypnotist that John went back to Yoko? Is that what he's trying to say there? Is he trying to say in his own way that it's not Yoko's fault, that it's somehow Elliot's fault? That I don't know what he's trying to say there. He's trying to get the blame off Yoko, but in a kind of a roundabout way, but without saying it. He's basically saying that the hypnotist actually did his job and actually got him to go back to Yoko. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what he's trying to say.
I just wonder what the whole Lost Weekend episode was all about anyway, because apparently it occurred with Yoko's blessing. She suggested that John should take up with May Pang and go and live in LA for, what was it, a little over a year or something?
18 months, yeah.
18 months, okay. So reportedly he was getting drunk all the time and getting into fights. He got into a beef with Todd Rundgren, the musician, and there was an open letter that he penned to Melody Maker, laying into Lennon, calling him a false revolutionary or rebel, and accusing him of striking a waitress in the Troubadour Club. And Lennon wrote back to Todd Rundgren and basically said, yes, I did hit the waitress. And it was just very scathing in his riposte to him. But what would have been the value of that whole situation? Because John's doing drugs, getting drunk, hanging out on the Sunset Strip and such. I don't know why Yoko would have wanted him to be doing all that. And then she clicks her fingers when she thinks the time is right, and he goes right back to her, apparently on her instruction. So it's a very, very bizarre period in his life, isn't it?
It is. Good point, Mark. I mean, according to the officially sanctioned Elliot Mintz pushed version of the John and Yoko story, yeah, for 18 months he went on this lost weekend. She threw him out. May Pang she accompanied him on this journey, and apparently, according to the official account we're given, it was 18 months of pure hell. He was living in this world of debauchery, drug addiction, alcoholism, depression, suicidal tendencies, wanted to go back to Yoko. His life was hell. It was a mess. It was empty.
Do you remember that strange story you brought up in a previous episode as well about, I think you said May Pang found him smashing up a room. Was it a hotel room or a room in his home? And he was in an absolute rage, and the only comment he would make was, it's all Roman Polanski's fault.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The hell is that all about?
Yeah.
And I think too, being focused so much on John and what John was doing during those 18 months, nobody's talking about what Yoko was doing during those 18 months. Why did she want to get him out of the Dakota for that long? Was there something else going on there? Was she doing some sinister things? While everybody's focused on what John was doing, what was she doing?
Well, Matt, when you were telling that anecdote about Yoko trying to get the vibe of that neighboring apartment in the Dakota, that just sounded like a deleted scene from Rosemary's Baby to me. You can imagine that being in that movie.
And and of course, the Dakota building was used for the exterior shots of the fictional Branford apartment building. So, and the thing is, May Pang has always said that this wasn't a lost weekend, quote unquote. It was one of John Lennon's most productive and happiest periods of his life after the Beatles, because if it was a lost weekend, she says, how is it that he managed to record 2 albums, one of which went to #1, if I'm not mistaken? He recorded a #1 hit with Elton John, a #1 hit with David Bowie, which was Fame. He produced Harry Nilsson's album Pussycats, and he was also beginning to reignite relationships with certain people from the 60s that he used to hang around with, namely Mick Jagger and also Paul McCartney.
Yeah, and also his son Julian.
And also
right?
his son Julian from his estranged marriage. And he was also beginning to get on well with his ex-wife Cynthia from his days in Liverpool. They were beginning to forge at least some kind of amicable, friendly kind of communication.
Well, that's interesting timing then, because the minute he got back to the Dakota, what was that, 1974?
75, yeah.
75. Okay, so Sean was born in October of 75 on John's birthday. So immediately he goes back to Yoko. She gets pregnant, presumably, and Sean is the result. And then he enters his house husband phase, doesn't he? Where he's basically locked away in the Dakota for about 4 years. And he's baking bread and stuff like that. And not really being in the public spotlight at all until 1980, when he comes up with the Double Fantasy album with Yoko, and then he doesn't last much longer beyond that. So the timing is all very suspect.
It is, especially when you consider that he was beginning to consider going back into the world of protest, because he'd given up protesting in 1973 when his immigration lawyer told him to stop it, because basically he'd been fighting against the Nixon administration with anti-Vietnam War demonstrations. He was fighting for the British to get out of Northern Ireland. He was teaming up with the Black Panthers and various other campaigners and protesters and so on. The immigration services wanted him out. They wanted to throw him out of the US where he was living at the time, and he didn't want to leave. But his immigration lawyer said, look, if you don't stop doing all this radical politic type stuff, they're going to have enough evidence to throw you out. So he had to stop. But once he got that green card in 1975, 76, and he came out of this so-called retirement from the music business in 1980, he'd already put down in his diary a demonstration that he was due to go on. The week he was shot, he was due to go on a demonstration that week somewhere in America. I can't remember where it was, for a workers' rights. I think it was a strike. There were some workers that were striking, and he was going to go out. So he was basically going to reignite that side of his life. And lo and behold, what a coincidence, he gets shot.
Right.
And Elliot Mintz, in the book, he doesn't lay into May Pang, but he does kind of say, yeah, well, May Pang's got her version of events, but that's not the way it was. It was a lost weekend of debauchery, depression. John did miss Yoko. So basically, he's pushing that particular narrative. What I do find a little bit confusing, well, there's a lot of things that I find confusing. For example, who was it that actually got that hypnotist to hypnotize John at the Dakota? And it looked like it did actually work, but who was actually responsible? Was it Elliot, as he says, or was it Yoko? Is he lying? Is he saying it's him so that he can cover for her? I don't know. But another thing that I find a little bit odd is that I do seem to recall in the first episode when we talked about Elliot Mintz living in Laurel Canyon. In that episode, I seem to recall that he said, and I've got this straight from the horse's mouth. I've heard him say it himself in interviews when I was researching for that first episode. Elliot said that he moved to Laurel Canyon in the mid-60s. But in this book, he says he moved there in the late 60s. Not only that, but I do seem to recall in the first episode that I also discovered from him, having said in interviews, that he didn't live in Laurel Canyon after John Lennon's death, that he moved out. But in the book, well, not actually in the book, I heard a podcast of him a few weeks ago talking about the book, promoting the book. And he said in the podcast that Sean Lennon, after John's shooting during the 80s, Sean would come and stay with him at Laurel Canyon during the summer months for summer vacations. So what's going on there? Surely you can't have a bad your memory can't be that bad.
Well, if it is, you shouldn't be writing a book.
Yeah, exactly. And apparently, it's very, very odd. But yeah, there are 2 or 3 chapters in the book where he writes about Laurel Canyon, the whole scene there. Believe what version you like about when he moved there, but he does state in the book that he does recall John and Yoko coming to one of his birthday parties there. This would have been around 1972. And also attending that party was Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees. These were all neighbours, Laurel Canyon neighbours. Also Alice Cooper was there. And he also recalls John and Julian coming to see him during that so-called lost weekend. They also popped round to see him at Laurel Canyon as well. So that would have been about a year later. So there has been activity with John Lennon in Laurel Canyon. Yeah, for sure. But what's wrong? How can you not remember when you moved into a home and when you moved out? Either you moved out in 1980 or you didn't. How can you not remember not living there through the 80s? What's that all about?
It's a bit suspect. I think we should probably start to move into Paul McCartney related stuff now, so we don't run out of time, because we've got a bunch of stuff to talk about there. And maybe a good place to start, which is quite topical, would be, let's get this right, Bill and Manlinda Gates' daughter Phoebe is dating Paul McCartney's grandson Arthur, son of Mary McCartney. And just hearing that makes me want to go and take a shower. Just the thought. The McCartneys and the Gateses married into each other. So, marriage of convenience here?
Yeah, that seems like an odd couple, doesn't it? I mean...
Pretty much, yeah.
Odd unless you're going for some agenda pushing for future generations, with future generations, you're mapping the agenda for, you're looking ahead.
Yeah, briefing the offspring for what agendas to be pushing in the next generation.
Yeah, exactly. I know we mentioned this in the previous episode of Magical Mystery Talk. Me and Desiree and I discussed that at the time it was a rumor. At the time, there were rumors going around that Phoebe was dating Arthur Donald, Paul McCartney's grandson, but it was just a rumor then, and this rumor was sparked off by a photo that Phoebe had posted on Instagram of her and Arthur standing next to each other, but in the caption with the Instagram photo there was no indication at all that they were dating. Actually, that there was no reference made to Arthur at all in the caption. And if you look at the photo, it's just them standing next to each other on a balcony in France. They're just standing next to each other. They're not holding hands or hugging each other or...
So maybe we're just told they're dating. That's all we need, just to be told.
Well, this is the thing, because since then, because nobody... Because it wasn't made explicit in that photograph that they were dating, it was just a rumor. But since then, in June sometime around June this year, it's actually been confirmed that yes, Phoebe Gates is dating Paul McCartney's grandson. And I found one of the news reports from June that confirms this.
Was it the 6th of June? 6624?
It might have been.
Just a guess.
I don't have the actual... I should have kept the date. I didn't keep the date on this news report. I'm not actually sure. But the headline reads, Bill Gates' daughter, Phoebe, confirms relationship with Paul McCartney's grandson. Bill Gates' daughter, Phoebe Gates, has revealed she's in a relationship with Paul McCartney's grandson, Arthur Donald. On June 26th, the 21-year-old daughter of the billionaire Microsoft founder confirmed her long-speculated romance with Arthur, the son of the Beatles legend's eldest daughter, Mary McCartney. In a photo diary for the website Nylon, Phoebe documented her graduation from Stanford University. Didn't we mention Stanford just a little bit earlier with regards to MK Ultra?
America's Tavistock.
Yeah, Phoebe documented her graduation from Stanford University, where she received a Bachelor of Science degree in human biology in just 3 years. While sharing photos from the June 15th ceremony, she shared a candid snap of herself with the 25-year-old Arthur, who she referred to as her boyfriend. My boyfriend, Arthur, giving me a lift post-ceremony, Phoebe captioned an image of herself being carried on Arthur's back. She shared another photo with her boyfriend taken during her graduation party that evening. This marked the first time Phoebe has confirmed months of speculation surrounding her relationship with Arthur. The couple initially sparked romance rumours in October 23 when she shared a photo on Instagram of them smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. Arthur is the eldest son of British photographer Mary McCartney and her ex-husband, TV producer Alistair Donald. Arthur attended University College School in London before graduating from Yale University in 2021 with a major in history. I think I mentioned this in the previous episode of Magical Mystery Talk. Phoebe has actually known Arthur's auntie, Paul McCartney's other daughter, Stella, for a very long time. And the reason that she's known Stella for a very, very long time is because Stella has been good friends for many, many years with Melinda Gates. And I don't know if my memory's playing tricks, but I do seem to recall reading somewhere in the last few weeks or so that it was Stella who actually introduced her nephew Arthur to Phoebe. So yeah, I don't know if she was introducing him to Phoebe in order to fix them up, as it were, to whatever. But yeah, so the Gateses and the McCartneys are actually very closely entwined, have been for a number of years.
Not the most obvious of bedfellows on the surface.
On the surface, yeah, on the surface. And
Scratch the surface.
Yeah, I'd rather not. And I've found a photograph actually online of Paul with Bill Gates, if that is Paul, obviously.
If that's Bill.
If that's Bill, whoever it is, flat nose or the straight nosed one, or the one with the scar on the cheek, or on the chin, or not. So there you go.
All right, so we're into McCartney territory, and we like anniversaries on this show, and we've just passed the 55th anniversary of the Paul is dead rumor going mainstream in the United States. That was October 1969, and actually it was the 12th of October, which turns out to be an interesting date in Beatles history and generally, because that happens to be the birth date of one Aleister Crowley. You might have heard of him. So 12th of October is when this radio DJ Russ Gibb in Detroit hosted a phone-in show, and a bunch of students were calling in, and they were saying that they'd decoded clues left on the Beatles' Abbey Road album, newly released at the time, which they claimed suggested that the real Paul McCartney was dead and had been replaced. That's the famous zebra crossing picture, of course, which was taken on the 8th of August 1969. And that night, the so-called Tate Manson murders happened up in the Hollywood Hills, one of so many synchronistic connections between the Beatles, Rosemary's Baby, Charles Manson, Roman Polanski, and Sharon Tate. They just never end. I mean, here's one, for instance. Charles Manson was arrested at Spahn Ranch and taken in for police questioning on the 12th of October 1969. That's not the date where he finally had the Tate Manson murders pinned on him, but he was arrested for separate misdemeanors on that date. So right at the time that this call-in show is happening, with all these students saying that Paul McCartney is dead, Charlie Manson's getting arrested. So this was, I guess, about 3 years after Paul is said to have died in this terrible car accident, and the date that's most often given for it is 9/11, which is either November the 9th or September the 11th, depending on whether you're looking at the American or British date formats. And this is immortalised in the Memoirs of Billy Shears book by Thomas Hugh Harriot. Mike Williams, Sage of Quay, has done hours and hours and hours of shows just picking up on this idea that Paul died in 1966 and was replaced by this individual named William Shepherd, known as Billy Shears. And supposedly we got a clue on the Sgt. Pepper album in the summer of 1967, The Summer of Love, where they say, "May I introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears," which is supposedly the introduction of the replacement officially in the public eye for the first time. So I've been back and forth with this whole Paul is dead idea since I got into this area of research about 15 years ago. And very early on, I bought the conspiracy theory suggesting that McCartney died in 1966 and this guy, William Shepherd, took over. And there's lots of instances of this guy answering to the name Billy or William and saying cryptic things in interviews like, "There are two Paul McCartneys and I can't believe I'm really him. It's like there's two of me," comments like this. But I'm at the point now where I can say with certainty, from having looked at so many pictures and so many hours of footage, that there's been more than one Paul McCartney. But I've got an interesting take on it, which I don't know what you guys think of this, but in the 1960s, we had a Paul who was kind of rounder, chubbier faced, and he was a bit shorter, seemingly, than the Paul that we think of today. And most people seem to think that's the original biological James Paul McCartney. So we saw him for a period from pretty much when the Beatles went mainstream with Love Me Do in 1962 through to about 65, 66. And then we get this taller individual with the slimmer, longer face who seems to appear in most of the photos and video footage. So what if the guy we have today, the taller, slimmer-faced individual, is actually the real Paul McCartney, given that in early photographs he appears very similar to the one we have today, and many of these photographs are from pre-Fame days, from before the Beatles actually broke through. And what if they inserted this chubbier, sort of rounder-faced, shorter fellow, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but they put him in the public eye for a big part of the 1960s, and this would be the guy that dated Jane Asher for the most part, because it seems that the other guy, the taller guy, also was seen stepping out with Jane Asher, so Jane dated both Pauls. Hope you're paying attention, there'll be questions later. So wouldn't it be an absolute mindfuck if they put this fellow in and everyone thinks, oh, that's Paul McCartney, that's what he looks like, but actually he was the replacement? And then for whatever reason, round about 1966, they start using the taller, slimmer-faced guy, who is the real Paul, and they send everyone off down the garden path thinking, he's the replacement, they killed the real Paul. But actually, the one we think of as the real Paul was always the replacement. That's where I'm at with it now. So wow. I don't know what you think of that theory.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about this before, and it's interesting to see that there's that you're not straying down the orthodox path, because I think the orthodox path has got a lot of holes in it. The orthodox path being that Paul McCartney died either in September, November 1966 in a car crash somewhere in or around London, and then he was replaced by Billy Shears, Shepherd, whatever name you want to give.
There's a clear demarcation line in that theory. It's like on this date, everything changed. But I think it's not as black and white as all that.
No,
what is.
Certainly
not.
Certainly not. From the research I've done, and I've written an article about this, and it went on forever. And you can find it on the Occult Beatles. I've actually done photograph and video comparisons, and there are Pauls that were around pre-66. And having looked at the shape of the nose and other aspects of his face, you can see that same Paul post 66. But at the same time, there's another Paul that you can see pre 66 with a different shaped nose that you can also see post 66. So that would suggest to me that there is two of them that's always been running around, pre and post.
What about those early pictures of Astrid Kirchers in the Hamburg days? A very young Paul looks, to my thinking, like present day Paul and not like the chubbier faced one that we had.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there's also that moped crash that he's said to have had. Some people, although some people dispute that it was a moped crash, which happened, according to the official account, December 65, Boxing Day 65. Although if you read Mike McCartney, his brother, his biography, he states in it, if I'm not mistaken, that it was sometime in 66. And also, if you look at it, it majorly cut his face, didn't it? There were photographs taken after this supposed moped crash where you see Paul's face with cuts in it and bruising, and he's got a cut in his lip, which like a scar kind of thing. Looks almost like he's been beaten up, basically, been taken to a room somewhere and beaten to within an inch of his life.
Right.
And then, lo and behold, about a month after this so-called crash on Boxing Day, there are photographs of him, I think, at George Harrison's wedding or somewhere. And you look at his face, and he's got no blemishes whatsoever, no scarring, nothing. What? So all of that scarring it all disappeared in a month. The thing is, what happened after that moped crash, quote unquote, is that he cut his lip, and he has got a slight bump on his lip. It's a scar, but it looks like a bump on his upper lip. And so this is...
He also cracked a tooth, correct?
He cracked a tooth. Apparently what happened was the tooth went through his lip, through his mouth, and that's why he's got this bump. So that's pre-66. If you look at video footage and certain footage post-66, you can see that lip bump. So what the hell's going on there? Also, I've noticed that there is footage of Paul post-66 without the lip bump. So there's some with and some without. And before anybody says, oh yeah, this is Photoshop, no, this is video footage. I've looked at video interviews of Paul in the 80s, and in some of those, he's got that lip bump.
It reminds me of how in the Hey Jude video, which was shot in September 68, you've got Paul looking into the camera with hazel green eyes, and he's clean shaven. And then on the 2nd of January 1969, we've got footage of Paul in the Get Back sessions with a full bushy beard. So if that's the same guy, we're supposed to believe he's gone from clean shaven in September to a full bushy beard, 4 months later? I don't think you can grow a beard of that length in that short a time.
And wasn't there another...
Matt, you've got a beard. Tell me.
Well, and especially Paul McCartney, I mean, he doesn't, he has that soft kind of face look to him, and you rarely see him with a beard, especially overnight like that. And right. So, yeah, that's a difficult conundrum to. So
maybe there were two Pauls being used. One of them's busy growing a beard behind the scenes while the other one's in the spotlight, and then they put the bearded one in the spotlight and do that switch and wonder who notices.
What about this? So I seem to think that in 1960, when the Beatles were in Hamburg, doing their nightclub thing, and when they met Astrid Kircher, however you might pronounce her last name, I personally think something happened in Hamburg, because prior to that, the Beatles, they just kind of were messing around. They were, the bad boy kind of look with their leather jackets and all that stuff. And it's been said that they were not that great of a band. They were not very well put together. They were just kind of partying. They were, they weren't defined musically.
Polished.
Nobody knew how to read music. They had a handful of songs maybe, but they basically did covers for the most part. And then all of a sudden, after they met Astrid Kutcher and were in Hamburg and came back, then all of a sudden it was like overnight, they just took off and were this huge band that had hundreds of songs and, could perform musically and, were in the studio and could, produce all of these studio quality songs. And I personally think something happened in Hamburg, and whether that was they actually signed there, maybe they got doubles at that point, and they had like a whole other band that was more for show, that were maybe cuter looking. And as far as Paul McCartney had a much more face for commercialism, and they just kind of went off with two different Paul McCartneys from that point. One that was more musically inclined, and one that was more for the TV, for showing. And they kind of intermixed these two people the entire time.
Yeah. Well, there's Miles Mathis's twins theory.
The twins.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Miles Mathis maintains that they're twins, but if they really were, wouldn't they look more like each other rather than as different as these two seem to?
Yeah, but they do look very similar. I mean, you do still have the mass of people that see both of these different characters and assume that they're the same person. So in some respect,
well, they've got away with it for 60 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So
what you're saying about Hamburg and performance, using one for performance and another for other, that instantly makes me think of Paul now, or whoever it is that's on stage. We've got this 82-year-old guy that performs on stage for 3-hour sets without a break, doesn't even stop to have a drink of water, and he does this night after night. Okay, not night after night after night after night, but he does consecutive runs, 3.5-hour shows. When he played at Glastonbury, he played for 3 hours a couple of years ago at the Glastonbury Festival in the UK. And people say, how does he do it? How does this guy manage this? What an amazing guy. He's 82. Well, if you're standing in a stadium and you're right at the back of it, how do you know that person that's standing on stage singing to you is the same person that was singing to another audience the night before? Is it the same Paul? If you're 82 years old and you look amazing on stage singing and all the rest of it, maybe it's because it's not the same person. Maybe they switch. Maybe that one sings one night, and the next night someone else goes on the stage and does the show.
Or maybe he's the robot.
Yeah. Yeah, just an idea. They might even be miming. You know.
So many occult overtones to the idea of Paul dying and being replaced. Just makes me wonder if it was one big sort of occult ritual in line with the belief systems of these satanic controllers of the music industry. Yeah, when you read the Hugh Harriet book, Memoirs, it's very esoteric and demonstrates high-level, adept occult knowledge on the part of whoever wrote that book, tied into the Beatles mythos.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And on that subject, there's Gregory Paul Martin, of course, who narrated Memoirs of Billy Shears, and he's been in the news this year as well. He was on a couple of podcasts. He was on the Mark Atwood show, and he was also on Truth Stream. This is Gregory Paul Martin, of course, son of Beatles producer George Martin.
Eldest son, is he?
Eldest son, yeah. He was from the first marriage, from George Martin's first marriage. And he was talking on, I think it was on, I've watched both the podcasts. Mike Williams shared them on his YouTube page, and I caught them on there. And he was talking on, I think it was on on Mark Atwood's podcast. He said that at the moment, he said that when he was asked to narrate the audio version of the Memoirs of Billy Shears, whether you believe him or not, he claims that he thought it was a parody. He thought that the makers of it, when they approached him to narrate the book, he thought that it was some kind of lampooning of Paul is Dead. It was some kind of joke or something. So he took part in it because he's an actor, isn't he? So he says Gregory Martin is an actor, a professional actor. So he narrated it thinking it was a spoof. That's what he claims anyway. And to quote Gregory, he thought that the P.I.D, the Paul is Dead theory, was basically ridiculous. That's the quote he gave in this interview with Mark Atwood. But he's now come around to the idea that it's possible, very possible indeed, that actually Paul is not the Paul that he thought was Paul. That there is some kind of weight to this Paul is Dead theory, this conspiracy theory. To quote him, this is what he said. He said, frankly, when I think about Paul, because I've been around him so much, it sort of seems plausible because, I met him when I was very, very young, and he's certainly not the person now, when I think about it, that he was when I met him. So I believe it. That's what he says. Yeah, I mean, we talked about Gregory in a couple of episodes ago, didn't we? How he was standing up against the Rona. He was on Twitter. He was very, very, he was almost like conspiracy theorist in his stance against the Rona and the lockdowns and everything.
Well, he was due to come on my show this year. So he did a show with Amanda McLeod, a friend of mine in Australia. He appeared on her show, I think, in the early part of this year. And Amanda said to me, oh, you should try and get Gregory onto your show. And he'd already said no once to me at that point. But I reached out to him again and said, would you reconsider? And he agreed. He said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And I said, well, I want to talk about your thoughts on Paul McCartney. And he said, yeah, okay, fair enough. And then a week or so before we were due to do the interview, I got an email from him saying, Mark, I just can't do it. I've looked at some of the stuff you say and you post, and I can't come on a program like that. I can't be with a host who talks about the stuff you do. Sorry. So he bailed out. So he's all over the place. One minute he says it's ridiculous and it was a parody. Next minute he says he's coming round to the idea. And the next minute he bails out of an interview because he thinks it's conspiratorial. I don't get it.
I don't get it. And he's been very quiet on Twitter recently. I know when the lockdowns were going on, he was very, very vocal, if that's the right word to use for Twitter. But he was constantly on Twitter, attacking the whole, the lockdowns and the jibby jab and all of that kind of stuff. But he hasn't actually posted anything there since, I think, May of 24. I think he's been very quiet, and apparently he was going to be releasing a book. That's something else he talked about in one of these podcasts. He says he's currently writing a book about his life, and to quote him, he says, it deals with my experience of black magic, and that's why I'm going to call the book Blackbird, Black Magic in My Family, he says. So he's talking about George Martin's family here, about his family and his dad's George Martin, which is very intriguing. So, but that's it. I've looked on his website. He's got an official website. I tried to find out more about this upcoming book, but there's no mention of it at all, not even a hint. So why didn't he want to speak to you, Mark? Did he pick out anything particular that he didn't agree with, or he was nervous of, or?
No, he didn't highlight anything specific. I think he just said that he'd been on my YouTube page, and I don't know, maybe it's the God stuff I've been doing. I've been talking about, theological and spiritual matters this year, so maybe he didn't like some of that. But he just said that he'd looked at my output and he honestly couldn't put his name to being on that sort of show. So who knows?
He's all over the place. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. I really don't. He's well all over the place. I don't know what he thinks from one moment to the next. Yeah.
Indeed. We're in the McCartney zone at the moment. And of course, linked to the McCartneys are the Asher family. So maybe we should talk a bit about that, because you've got a whole bunch of material on the Ashers there, I think, Matt. Particularly the passing away of Peter and Jane Asher's cousin Diana, who we had hoped to get on one of these shows. I put out an invitation to her a few weeks ago via Twitter, which is the only means we had of trying to reach her, and I never got a reply. Tried 2 or 3 times. Would have been great to get her on this show, but it didn't happen. So what do we know about her?
Yeah, Dana of Rotting Jewels. I think she's got a YouTube channel, Rotting Jewels. I haven't watched her recently, but I did get into watching a lot of her videos, and I sent you guys like an edited highlights of some of her presentations. And basically, her argument is, and I think it's less of an argument as such. Well, what she's saying is basically is that the process that Church of the Final Judgment, this occult religious organization that was launched in the UK in the 1960s, is connected to the Best Friends Animal Society, which used to be called the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary. So sometime in the 1970s, she's putting across this argument, which she's trying to solidify this argument by putting forward various documentation, business records, and so on that she's found online, where it pretty much confirms that there is a connection. Basically, the Process Church of the Final Judgment broke off in the 70s sometime. They launched in the 60s, but sometime in the 1970s, they kind of broke off, and they morphed into this Best Friends Animal Society. For those who are not aware of the Process Church, they were formed in Britain by a couple of former Scientologists, and I was researching them some years back for a Rolling Stones article on my site, Conspiro Media, because the Rolling Stones have some links to the Process Church from back in the 60s. And whilst I was researching that, I watched a couple of interviews, and one of the interviews I watched was from Timothy Wiley, who was one of their earliest members. And I was trying to find out a little bit more about what the process were about, their theology, what their belief was, their belief system. And basically what he said was the Process Church basically brought together Christ with Satan, or to be more precise, what he said was that Jehovah, Lucifer, and Satan in the theology of the process are unified by Christ. So the concept is basically love your enemy. And who was Christ's enemy but Satan? So the idea that the Process Church had there was to unite Satan with Christ, because opposites should love each other, unconditional love, the Christian ethic, and so on. So that's how he explained it in an interview some years back. Now, the reason that we're mentioning this on this particular episode is that it was announced earlier this year in January, I think it was, that Peter and Jane Asher's cousin Diana had passed away, and her death was announced on the Best Friends website, Animal Sanctuary. It was announced on that website that her obituary was printed on that, was published on that website, because apparently, according to Best Friends, quote unquote, she was a co-founder of Best Friends. That Jane Asher, Paul McCartney's girlfriend between 1963 to 68, when they broke it off. And Dr. Richard Asher, Jane's father, there's rumors that he was involved in MK Ultra type experiments in the 60s with drugs which were being sponsored by the British police. That's according to an alleged human guinea pig who says they were involved in these experiments. That this person claims that one of the doctors that was involved in this was Dr. Richard Asher, this physician, this well-known doctor, who also wrote a paper on hypnosis. He also practiced hypnosis on his patients. So this brings us back into the realms of mind control, because Paul McCartney did live with the Asher family in their household when he was dating Jane. So there is...
It could well have been a test subject of Dr. Asher's work.
Indeed. And of course, he died in suspicious circumstances. He was found dead in his basement after his family reported him missing after 7 days. The official account of that, the official verdict was it was suicide. But what I've always questioned is, how is it that he was in the basement for 7 days, reported missing, and none of his family bothered to even look down there, which is just very, very odd. Anyway,
tried the basement. Oh,
oh God, we forgot. Oh dear, we've been worried. We've been out of our minds for 7 days. Now we should remember. Yeah. So, and something else that's been, which is mentioned in Diana's obituary, is that she was, quote unquote, an aristocrat in the line of the Duke of Cornwall, which is interesting because, according to the officially sanctioned biography, officially sanctioned McCartney biography, which many years from now, which came out in 1996 or 97, and which was authored by Barry Miles, who was Paul McCartney's friend in the 60s, and who actually opened a shop, the Indica bookstore and Indica gallery, with Peter Asher, Jane's brother. According to his officially sanctioned biography of McCartney, in it, he states that Margaret Asher, Jane and Peter Asher's mother, often took pains to point out that her side of the family, the Elliots, was the more illustrious of the family. Her father was the Honourable Edward Granville Elliot, brother of the 7th and 8th Earls of St. Germans of Port Eliot, St. Germans in Cornwall, an ancient Cornish lineage. And I think also Jane Asher has said in more recent times that she's revealed that she thinks she's got bloodline connected to Richard III as well, King Richard III.
Yeah, Dom from Sheep Farm is doing some genealogy research into Jane Asher, and he's uncovered that and other links to aristocracy and royalty and the peerage and such. And probably Charlemagne's in the mix as well, because he usually is.
Yeah, usually is. So we have this connection to the process. And it's not even a theory as such. When you look at the Beatles, they did actually employ, their company Apple did actually employ an in-house astrologer. Back in 1968, 69, their Apple company, which was a record company, of course, and a film company, electronics, media company, they actually did employ an in-house astrologer, and his name was Caleb Rupert Ashburton Dunning, and he was actually a member of the Process Church. Now, in the Mind Games book, which accompanies the box set, if you buy, there's actually an extended version of that book, which came out a few months later, which has got more pages in it. And in that book, there's actually some pages dedicated to John and Yoko's interest in the occult. And there's a section in there which is basically focusing in on astrology. And although they don't mention the Process Church in that section, they do mention this Caleb Rupert Ashburton Dunning. So, yeah, this Caleb guy, he used to be the manager of the Beatles' Apple boutique in London in 67, 68, whenever that was, their clothes shop. And then he moved over to their main offices. And in this Mind Games book, there are some actual quotes from people who, well, they don't mention the Process Church, but they pretty much confirm that this Caleb guy did actually work at Apple. There's a guy they quote in the book, a Richard DiLello, I think is... pardon me if I pronounced his name wrong. He was an Apple staffer, And yeah, Caleb was an in-house astrologer who, in Richard's words, subbed as a fortune teller for John Lennon, Paul McCartney and the Apple staff. His job was to read the stars daily and make a prediction, splitting his hours between his astral charts and the I Ching. He would make the daily rounds of the staff. Also quoted in this official Mind Games book is Beatles' trusted PR man and one of the Beatles' inner circle, Derek Taylor. And he said, and he's quoted in the book as saying, Caleb used to manage the Apple boutique, but when the Beatles learned about his interest in the I Ching, they took him on to study it in relation to the organisation. All the Beatles threw for the I Ching, and they took it very seriously. Caleb gave them reports, and they studied them at business meetings. Now, this isn't mentioned in the book, but it is said that the reason that Caleb eventually left Apple, now this hasn't been confirmed. This is just claims, allegations that I've read online, but basically the reason that he left Apple was because he fell out with John, because Caleb advised John, who at the time was involved in an extramarital relationship with Yoko. He was still married to his first wife. He actually advised John that he should leave Yoko and go back to his then wife Cynthia, and as a result of that they had a bit of a falling out and Caleb left. But yes, Caleb was a member of the Process Church, an active member of the Process Church. This is a fact. It's not mentioned in the Mind Games book. He is mentioned, but there's no mention of the Process Church. And if you look online, you can actually find copies of their magazine. They used to print a magazine called The Process. And you can actually find copies of the magazine which you can download. And I managed to find a screen cap of one of them. And Caleb is mentioned in the magazine. He's mentioned that he's actually in charge of distribution of the magazine, The Process.
Jimmy Savile was on the cover of one of those magazines.
He was indeed, and I've got a copy of that actual magazine. I've got it. I've downloaded it. Mick Jagger was in it. Also Marianne Faithfull, if I'm not mistaken, and Paul and Jane Asher were in it as well. And I've got screen caps of that. They appear in the actual Process magazine in a little feature which is about fear. It's a little mini feature where the Process goes out and asks people how they deal with fear, the concept of fear. And they've got these quotations from various members of the public. And lo and behold, two of the people they spoke to was Jane Asher and Paul McCartney. And Paul, in this edition of The Process, says, with regards to fear, he says, I'm not really afraid of people, nor of the world ending, anything like that. It's just fear, really, a fear of fear. It's not fear of a lion or of a man with a club. It's fear, a sort of abstract fear. Meanwhile, Jane is quoted as saying, I'm not afraid of people. They sometimes make me nervous, but not afraid. I used to be afraid of the world ending and all of that. Since then, I've learned not to think about it. I'm afraid, really, of just all the usual things that everybody else is. The Process also opened a bar in London, a bar, club, kind of restaurant kind of place where you could go chill. And it was called Satan's Cavern. And I've watched a documentary about this, and apparently, according to a couple of regulars there who were Process members, Beatles manager Brian Epstein was a regular at this place. So yeah, with regards to Diana, Jane's cousin, Diana was active for the Process before it changed into Best Friends, because in these downloaded editions that I've seen of the Process magazine, I've actually stumbled across an article where Diana is mentioned in the Process magazine. She's referred to in it as Mother Diana. Mm-hmm. I think the Process used to refer to each other as mother or brother, didn't they? They would fix brother or mother.
It was in San Francisco, and when it was started by the de Grimstons over there were people like Charlie Manson that were associated with it. Also, David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, serial killer. Also, Sirhan Sirhan, the guy that's said to have assassinated Robert Kennedy. So they were all members of the Process in San Francisco.
It started in London. Their office was in London. And actually not only is Diana mentioned in this magazine article, but she's mentioned because she hosted a Process radio show, would you believe? I didn't even know such thing existed, but she was a host of a Process radio show, so that's why she was being mentioned in the magazine. It was like a little news bulletin kind of thing, and there's a picture of her in there. There's actually a photograph of her in there, so there's absolutely no doubt that Jane Asher's cousin was involved in the Process Church. There is no alleged about it. It is a fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It even says as much on their on the Best Friends website as well, which, the Best Friends Sanctuary was morphed from the Process Church. And I believe the Process Church was also an offshoot of Scientology.
Yeah, it was. It was two. Yeah. Mary and was it Robert?
Robert de Grimston, yeah. The original name was McLean, but they changed it to de Grimston.
Yeah, they were former Scientologists, thrown out apparently according to the official account, but I don't know whether that's true or not. I didn't realise that the Best Friends website stated that they were formerly part of the Process Church. That went right past me. I looked on their website.
The Best Friends website says that Jane Asher's cousin, Diana Asher, was a founding member of the Best Friends Sanctuary. Yes.
Yeah, she was. But since then I've looked on some of those old magazines, the Process magazines, and I've actually found a photograph of her. So she can't get away from that one, and she's referred to as Mother Diana. And again, you've got Manson linking here, Manson linking to the Beatles in some way, shape, or form, because Manson, as you said, Mark, you kind of mentioned it in passing. Manson did actually conduct an interview for the Process sometime after the Tate incident. And that's what Dana, this Rotting Jewels website, this researcher has been looking into. She's trying to get more information about the Manson aspect to all of this as well. She's not only looking into Best Friends and its links, trying to get into the inner workings to find actual 100% proof that Best Friends and the Process are linked in some way through business records and so on. But she's also looking at trying to find absolute proof that Manson had, that the Manson events, the Sharon Tate killing and all of that, was somehow connected to the Process Church. That's what she's trying to do at the moment in her research. She's trying to dig into that, if you like. Very creepy. Right. All very creepy. It is creepy.
It sure is.
And no direct link there, but I know that a lot of the surviving family members of the Manson family went on to form a group called ATWA, which is Air, Tree, Waters, Animals.
Atwa.
And, Atwa. And they're supposedly, very similar to the Best Friend Sanctuary, all things animals, protecting them, keeping them in good living conditions, and et cetera, not destroying the environment. It's all very environmentally sounding and even a little Masonic sounding when you really get into it too. The family members are all color coded, and it reminds me like the Rainbow Girls, which are from the Masonic point of view, like the daughters of Masons, which are all color coded as well. And so I haven't really found a direct link between those two, but they just sound very similar. Schools of thought in that kind of way.
I'm sure it's just because they care, they're just people with big hearts that want to save animals. That's all it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very strange.
Well, look, we got a few minutes left, so maybe we should try and get a couple of other subjects in. There's the question of the Kasbar Club that I mentioned in passing earlier, which is an early venue just outside Liverpool in the West Derby area, where the Beatles played some of their very earliest gigs prior to the Cavern Club. So the Cavern Club is this tourist destination in Liverpool city centre that everyone knows about, but I feel far fewer people know about the Kasbar. And the gigs there were curated by Mona Best, the mother of Pete Best, the original drummer. And we've got this very strange story, which we've discussed in previous episodes, of Mona Best, Pete's mother, getting knocked up by Neil Aspinall, close confidant and assistant of the Beatles. And she got pregnant and gave birth to a son, Rogue Best. And it's very strange because Pete got axed from the band, whereas they kept Neil on, as an associate, you might think they would have done it the other way round and got rid of Neil because of this embarrassing incident and kept Pete on. But Pete got kicked out and replaced by Ringo. First mention of Ringo in this show, by the way. Sorry about that, Ringo. We haven't even mentioned George, actually. So the Kasbar was where Mona saw to it that the band had some of their earliest gigs with Pete still on drums. And so we got this story now of Pete and Rogue, who are half brothers, but they're sort of 20 odd years apart in age. And they're converting the Kasbar, which served as their home for many years, they actually lived there, into luxury Airbnb apartments, with rooms there named after Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, Pete Best, and original Beatles bassist Stuart Sutcliffe, but no room named after Ringo, because he joined later. And so Pete and Rogue have been pictured having curated the transition, and you can now apparently go and stay in these Airbnb apartments. I wonder if they've kept the original ceiling, because we've spoken before about the ceiling of the Kasbar Club having been decorated apparently by a young John Lennon, and he'd painted a whole load of occult symbols on the ceiling there. Yeah, I'm hoping to take a look at this place myself when I go up to Liverpool in a couple of weeks and just see what it looks like these days.
As far as I'm aware, those occult-looking symbols, it's called the Aztec Room, apparently.
Yeah. Aztec artwork, yeah.
Yeah, Aztec ceiling. That's according to Pete. Apparently, before Pete joined the band, they were called the Quarrymen, before they became the Beatles, they were called the Quarrymen, and then they eventually became the Beatles. And they
Quarrymen as in Masons?
In what way? I don't...
Well, Quarryman is a stonecutter, and a stonecutter is a Mason.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, just a coincidence. Yeah, and then Beatles, which could be the Egyptian scarab beetle.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, exactly. So they became the Beatles. If I'm not mistaken, they actually became the Beatles while they were at the Kasbar playing in this club. And as you say, this was...
Yeah, Silver Beatles, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the Silver Beatles, and then it was the Beatles. And Pete hadn't... Yeah. And Pete hadn't yet joined at that point. But yeah, he remembers them coming to play at the Kasbar before he was a member of them. And according to him, a few days before the club opened, John, Paul and George helped to paint the club. And according to Pete, John painted an Aztec ceiling, and there was also an Aztec room. And to quote Pete, this Aztec room had Egyptian graffiti and mystical Eastern signs on it. There was also a rainbow room, which was painted by Paul. So again, we're getting into the realms there of possible MK.
There's a rainbow room in Stranger Things in the narrative.
Well, there you go. And Mona painted a large dragon on the wall as well, Mona Best. So we've got sort of reptilian things going on there. But yeah, John was responsible for painting this Aztec ceiling with all this mystical Eastern signage on it, to quote, to paraphrase Pete. So that's always fascinated me, really, 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 really fascinated me, because maybe I'm being a bit unfair, but a hell of a lot of people who look at the Beatles and look at their occult symbology and so on, they tend to look at the later Beatles. They look at them in their fame days. They look at the cover of Sergeant Pepper with Aleister Crowley and different other kinds of stuff, maybe attaching Yoko to some of it as well. But no one really looks at the early Beatles. It's just, I find it fascinating. You can kind of understand it. Okay, if the Beatles, they found fame, they moved to London, and they start mixing in intellectual, quote unquote, circles. So they start meeting people who open their minds and their perspective towards occult thinking, esoteric thought. So authors, artists, occultists, and so on. So you can kind of understand where that would have led to in their artistry, in their music and symbology, in their artwork, and in the Beatles' career. But in Liverpool, where would they have picked all of that up? All this stuff that they were painting on the ceiling? Because John, at the time, this was 1959, 1960, John wasn't even 20 yet. Paul was 17, 18, and George was 16 years of age. So where on earth were they picking up all this kind of stuff? Why were they so inspired to paint all these kind of weird symbols and stuff so early on in their life.
Right.
There are some claims that it was Mona Best's idea for them to do the Aztec sealing, but I've found no. But that's just anecdotal. I've found no confirmation whatsoever to prove that.
Well, I'm looking into this for my upcoming book, and Rogue has written a book himself called The Beatles, The True Beginnings. And he reveals that Mona Best, would you believe it, came from a military family. She was raised in colonial India.
In India, correct?
Yeah, and her father was a major in the British Army. So once again, we have a military connection between the original drummer of the Beatles and everything else going on.
And she was pretty well off. Didn't she place a bet on a horse or something?
Yeah.
That's where she got most of her money in order to buy the Kasbah in the first place.
Serendipity.
Yeah, because back then, I mean, I just wouldn't think that a single woman like that would have the means or the money without having the money to operate a club like that. So she obviously came from some kind of a background or money or something in order to even have that.
The story is a little bit like that Elliot Mintz one with the John F. Kennedy thing, where pardon me for being so it's so negative here. What's the word? Cynical. But yeah, isn't it the story that one day Mona Best decided to take all her savings or something and just put them down on this one horse,
right?
And just like go for potluck, and lo and behold,
horse won.
Yeah, she won, and she could buy that house that became the Kasbar Club. Just one.
Yeah,
of those,
and it was the horse was like not a favorite to win, and
yeah, it was an outsider. Yeah.
And if I remember, the horse had a very strange name too. That was kind of synchronistic to everything too. Like "Never Say Die" or something like that was the name of the horse.
Well, of course, of course.
Isn't it interesting? If you do accept the official Paul is dead conspiracy theory, which, Paul McCartney died in 1966, the only Beatles left alive are the drummers, Pete and Ringo.
Right.
Funny thing.
I saw a T-shirt a few years back, and I did consider buying it. It was a picture of Paul and Ringo on the front, and it said drum and bass. I thought that was a clever play on words, that one. I thought that's quite clever. But yeah. Sorry, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Just looking up original Beatles drummers here, I didn't realise Norman Chapman and Tommy Moore.
Tommy Moore, yeah, he was with them for about a week. He was on their Scottish tour. They got Larry Parnes, the promoter from the 50s, Larry Parnes. He was kind of like the Simon Cowell of his day. He had this stable of stars, Billy Fury, springs to mind, I can't remember who else was on his bill, Joe Brown and others. And he was looking to put together a package tour, which was going to be headed by Billy Fury, who was the teen heartthrob singer of the late 50s, early 60s in Britain. And he was looking for a backing band. So he went to Liverpool and started auditioning loads of bands. And one of those bands was, as they were known then, I think, Johnny and the Moondogs, which was John, Paul, George, Stuart Sutcliffe on bass. But they didn't have a drummer. So they needed a drummer damn quick. So they got this Tommy Moore guy to come in. They didn't win the audition, because apparently the story goes is that Larry Parnes was listening to them and he liked the band as a whole, but what he didn't like was Stuart Sutcliffe's bass playing. And he says, I'll take you on to support Billy Fury, but you're going to have to get rid of the bass player. I'm afraid he's not very good. You'll have to replace him. And John Lennon is said to have said at that point, no chance, he's my best friend. He ain't going nowhere. So they lost out on that one, but they were given a tour of Scotland. I think it was about a week-long tour of Scotland with one of Parnes' lesser-known acts, a guy by the name of Johnny Gentle. So they went out on tour with this rock and roller Johnny Gentle, and I think Tommy Moore was called in basically to be their drummer for that tour. And yeah, that's what happened. And he was involved in, there was a car crash during one of the journeys to one of the venues, or one of the van that they were traveling in. There was a crash, and Tommy Moore broke his jaw or something, and they took him to hospital. And he was all in bandages and all this kind of thing, in real bad pain. And and because the Silver Beatles or Johnny and the Moondogs or whatever they were calling themselves at the time didn't have a drummer, they literally went to the hospital, pulled him out of the bed with all these bandages and, you know, things all over him, all these instruments, these hospital type things, all like, you know, screwed into him, and basically put him in the van and just drove him to the venue and made him play with all, you know, like sort of half comatose kind of thing. And when he returned to Liverpool, he said, "Right, that's it. I'm not having none of this. I'm not playing with them anymore." That's pretty much the story. Yeah.
I thought you would have a story.
Yeah,
about him.
I think that's Tommy Moore. That could be Johnny Hutch, but I might have got them mixed up. But it's one of those two. Yeah. Well, okay. Earlier this year saw the release of a new album and single by Brian Ray. Brian Ray has been Paul McCartney's guitarist and bass player for many, many years now, since 2002, which it means he's been Paul McCartney's guitarist longer than any guitarist in Wings or the Beatles has or had been. Which is a little side note there for you. So, yeah, earlier this year he released an album titled My Town, and on that album is a song which he released as a single earlier this year titled When the Earth Was Round, and it's basically attacking conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists. These are the lyrics. War of the Worlds on the radio scared your daddy right out of his home. Loch Ness Monster in the lake was all the rage. The moon landing, it wasn't real. They made that movie out in Bakersfield. Come on, baby, what happened to us? Can we get back to the way it was when the earth was round? Before the upside down, back when I was yours and you were mine. You heard 9/11 was an inside job from a guy named Bob. You might as well be addicted to drugs. Let's get back to the way it was when the earth was round, before the upside down, back when I was yours and you were mine. We used to fly so high, we could touch the sky. Everything was cool when you were mine. I can see in the sun, by the ocean in slow motion, that we had it all on this spinning ball. But we threw it all away. Now it's getting late. When the earth was round, before the upside down, back when I was yours and you were mine. And he appeared in a few podcasts and radio shows this year to promote the album and that single, and I had to listen to some of those. And this is what he said in one of those interviews. He says the song when the world was round when the earth was round. Sorry, pardon. Imagines a guy, and this is what he said in a podcast interview. He says the song imagines a guy who's lost a woman to conspiracy theories and cults or something. So basically what he's saying there is people who believe in conspiracy theories or follow them are cult followers, members of cults, which is quite insulting, really. So yeah, that's what he says in that podcast appearance. He says it imagines a guy, the song imagines a guy who's lost a woman to conspiracy theories and cults or something, and he's grieving it. And he names off some conspiracy theories, and he's just saying to his girlfriend, come on, can't we just get back to the way it was when the earth was round? Can't we agree on some basic truths? In another podcast appearance, he says the song is about romance in a post-truth world. It's a way to talk about this stuff in a way that isn't, sort of confrontational. Just sort of more like, I lost a girl to conspiracy theories and I'd like her back, but I don't think that's going to happen. And finally, just one more quote from another of his podcast appearances. He says, when the earth was round, it's like, what the heck? What are you talking about? And so I wanted to write to the idea that here we have a fascination in America with, and I've seen this podcast and it's in Vision, and he makes quotation signs. So he says, what the heck? What are you talking about? And so I wanted to write to the idea that here we have a fascination in America with, quotation signs, doing our own research and having our own opinions about things that are sort of proven and factual, scientific, medical, these kind of things. All good. Everyone gets their own ideas, but it's gone a little too far for me. I wanted to write about it in a way that was not scary or threatening or cruel or judgmental. But instead, the singer has lost his girlfriend because she started to believe in conspiracy theories. And, she just went down a rabbit hole and he couldn't get her out of the rabbit hole. So, yeah, that's what it's about. Interesting that he says that the song is about a singer who's lost his girlfriend, because if you actually look at the lyrics, if you the lyrics don't actually mention that the person who's lost his girl is a singer. So is he kind of saying that the person that lost this girl to conspiracy theories is him? Well, apparently not, because he goes on in this podcast interview to say that it didn't happen to me, losing a girl to conspiracy theories, but I do know some people that have gone down a rabbit hole, and I thought it would be a fun way to go around this, to write a song about it, and just naming off a litany of known hilarious conspiracy theories that have gotten attention, such as Loch Ness Monster, the moon landing was filmed in Bakersfield, and 9/11 was an inside job. So yeah, there you go. One conspiracy theory he doesn't mention in his song, of course, is Paul is dead. So there you go. And finally, with regards to Paul is dead, I know we've spoken about it at length. We spoke about it at length earlier. I just want to mention the release of a new P.i.D book that came out earlier this year. And I do have it here in front of me. Let me just grab it. Where did I put it? I've got it here underneath a load of papers or somewhere. Where is it? Aha, here it is. I've got it here in front of me. It's called Forbidden Fruit, Solving the Hidden Puzzle in the Beatles Works from the Psychedelic Era, and it's by Sharon Clemons. Now, I've got the book. As I say, I've got a copy of the book, but I haven't read all the way through it as yet, so I can't make a conclusive judgment on the book itself. But what she's saying in the book, what she's arguing, is that McCartney didn't die as a result of an accident, a car accident. She believes that he was murdered and that it didn't occur in England, that it happened somewhere in the US, and not in September, November 1966 either. She believes that Paul was murdered in Seattle during the Beatles tour of the US in the summer of 1966. The original Paul was murdered so that the so-called powers that be could replace him with a new one who would be more willing to help push forward a new world order agenda by introducing into society a more drug-friendly culture, basically the onset of the psychedelic era, the so-called counterculture. And she claims that in order to do this, they needed a new Paul, as it were, who would support this and propagandise it. The Beatles' US tour in the summer of '66 did go on after Seattle. It ended, I think it was in August, at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. And she also believes that MI6 were involved in his murder. Now, she claims in her book that John Lennon released clues that Paul died in Seattle. He released clues of that within the lyrics of certain Beatles songs, such as I Am the Walrus and Glass Onion, the song from the Beatles' double album, The Beatles, which of course was later nicknamed the White Album. As I say, I haven't finished the book, but I have read some of it, and I've read the chapter with regards to the clues, which are featured in Glass Onion. So if I may, I just want to read some parts of that chapter. I've got it here somewhere. Let's have a look. Here we go. So she says in the book, the first clue in the song Glass Onion is in the title of the song, Glass Onion. In the mid-1960s, glass art was growing in popularity, and the number of art galleries in Seattle featuring the work of glass artists was also growing. Seattle was quickly becoming a city known around the world for glass art. Glass onions, in particular, became a popular subject for glass blowing in Washington state, where the Walla Walla sweet onion is the state vegetable. The second clue to the place that John is talking about is the word flows. John is saying in the song Glass Onion that everything in the place he's talking about flows, where everything flows. If you've heard the song, that line, but sung a little bit better than that. So yeah, John is saying that everything in the place he's talking about flows in the song, and that would certainly be a way to describe Seattle. Since there is water all around and throughout Seattle. Puget Sound is on the west side of downtown Seattle. Lake Washington is on the east side of Seattle. The city is then divided in half by the Lake Washington Ship Channel and Lake Union. The southern half of the city is further divided in half by the Duwamish River, is that how you pronounce it, which empties into Elliot Bay, which juts in from Puget Sound. A number of residents of Seattle also live on the water, and this is an important clue pointing to the city. Glass Onion and some of the other Beatles songs also make reference to various Seattle industries and products. Before the tech industry exploded in the 1970s, Seattle was probably best known for its lumber industry. John's reference to the dovetail type of joint is what is relevant here, and it provides the third clue to Seattle. Dovetail joints join two pieces of lumber without using any mechanical fasteners. Furniture making was a natural industry to evolve in the Seattle area, given the area's booming lumber industry. As a result, a number of carpentry woodworking schools sprang up at Washington colleges. Some independent businesses also began giving lessons in the basics of furniture making, such as how to make dovetail joints. A fourth clue in Glass Onion is the keyword hole. John refers to a hole that is located in the ocean. There's the line in the song, fixing a hole in the ocean. Now, it doesn't appear to have anything to do with anything else in the song, Glass Onion, at least on the surface. Why is it there then? Well, John's hole refers to the Octopus Hole, a conservation area that is part of Hood Canal. Hood Canal is an extension of Puget Sound. Puget Sound is again an inlet of the Pacific Ocean. So the Octopus Hole is technically a hole within an ocean. This same octopus hole is also alluded to in the song Octopus's Garden from the Beatles' Abbey Road album. The lyrics to this song indicate that this particular Octopus's Garden has a cave nearby. In fact, there is a cave that is very close to the octopus hole. It is just north of it, off Highway 101. After clues of other songs are analysed later in this book, she goes on, it will become apparent that the octopus and the octopus hole play a significant role in the story that the Beatles are telling. A fifth clue in the song Glass Onion is the keyword tulips. This is referencing another local industry around the Seattle area, the tulip farming industry. The largest grower of tulips in the United States is located just an hour north of Seattle in Mount Vernon. Every year, the spectacular and world-renowned Skagit Valley Tulip Festival is held in this area. Pardon me for if I mispronounce Skagit. I apologise. Every year the spectacular and world-renowned Skagit Valley Tulip Festival is held in this area. Tulips grow especially well in the Washington counties around Puget Sound and are extremely plentiful in Seattle and its suburbs. This particular Valley Tulip Festival is not the only festival of interest near Seattle, though, and that leads us to the sixth clue, the reference in Glass Onion to the song Strawberry Fields Forever. There are a number of annual strawberry festivals in the Seattle area. That's because there are a large number of strawberry farms on the western side of the Cascades Range, at the mountain range east of Seattle. Strawberry production in this location began in the 1830s, and growers soon discovered that the land west of the Cascades is wonderful for growing strawberries. As a consequence, strawberry fields can be found throughout the areas around Seattle. In Glass Onion, John Lennon points listeners back to the song Strawberry Fields Forever, which was released the previous year in 1967. He hints that the song was more meaningful than listeners ever realised. So while Glass Onion points to areas near Seattle to the west, the Octopus Hole, to the north, tulips, and to the east, the Cascades and the strawberry fields up and down their west side, I Am the Walrus points to a place of Seattle with its reference to a Tuesday that was bloody. Because, of course, in the song I Am the Walrus, John sings Stupid Bloody Tuesday. Now that is actually in reference, Sharon argues, to a place by the name of Centralia in Washington, the location of the infamous Centralia massacre, which occurred on a Tuesday in 1919. The references to these four places together paint an area around Seattle with the city in the bull's eye. So there you go, there's an excerpt there from the book by Sharon Clemons, released earlier this year in 2024, Forbidden Fruit, Solving the Hidden Puzzles in the Beatles' Work from the Psychedelic Era.
So that brings us to the end of the episode. I guess maybe we should try and do 2 in 2025. What do you think?
Definitely try.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've covered a lot of ground in this one. So what are you guys working on yourselves? Any upcoming projects to mention as we sign off here?
Oh, so many. I'm currently putting together a video presentation of the Mind Games album box set, because I've actually bought the I think I mentioned it earlier. There's the Mind Games book that you get in the box set, but there's also the extended version of that book with more pages in it and more information. And having bought that book and looked into it, oh boy, there is so much in there which of a conspiratorial and occult flavor. So I thought I'd put it together as a video presentation. I've pretty much scripted it, put together all the points that I want to talk about. So basically what I've got to do now is kind of put it together on video. So that's coming up. I'm also thinking of writing an article to publish early next year, on the life of Brian Epstein. There was a recent movie about a biopic.
You're going to call it The Life of Brian, aren't you?
I never thought of that. Nice one. Yeah, so an occult conspiratorial aspect, looking at Brian Epstein's life from an occult and conspiratorial aspect. Yeah, from that perspective. Yeah, so I'm planning to do that as well. And also a couple more video presentations. One about St. John's Wood, the area of London where Abbey Road is situated, and links to occult conspiratorial kind of stuff, of course, obviously, and also links to the Bloomsbury group and the Fabian Society and other such weird and wonderful and occultic type things. So yes, very, very busy. And of course, trying to live a normal, regular life, earning a living, eating, finding time to cook some food. Yeah, so that's me.
Growing beards, that sort of thing.
Yeah, growing beards.
So Desiree, what you got happening?
I honestly don't have too much going as far as Beatles mysteries and all that good stuff. I have recently had a rekindling of the John Lennon assassination and all of the weirdness and oddities from that, because I read David Whelan's Mind Games book, which is absolutely fascinating, and it kind of re-sparked my interest in all that. So I have been looking into a lot of that. I haven't been writing or doing much of research as far as internet searching and all that good stuff, and writing in the blog, but it has definitely rekindled my interest, and I hope to get more into it. I'm mother of 2 teenagers and run a business, and by the time I'm done with all of that, I'm like asleep. So my time has just been not on Beatles conspiracies and whatnot, but I do have a severe love for it, and I would love to get back into it if life ever slows down.
Yeah.
So
teenagers are no joke, trust me.
Oh man, and yeah, I have a senior this year, so it's like doubly more, applying for colleges and just all the things that go along with that. So yeah, it's been a busy time.
Sure. Well, I'm writing my next book, which is to be titled "No One's Dad's a Plumber." That's actually going to be the title. I've got chapters in there on the Beatles and McCartney, because this stuff never ends, as you well know. On which note, we'll see everyone for episode 11, whenever that may be, hopefully sooner rather than later. And thanks for listening, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.